Here we're being asked to solve absolute value equations. We've got an equation where one part of it's going to be the absolute value and then the other part of it is going to be a constant. Now, just a quick review. Absolute value is represented as this, two vertical lines with a number or a variable inside of it. And what that really means is whatever this value is, it doesn't matter, it's going to be a positive x, okay? So if you've got the absolute value of a -7, well, you ignore the negative and you just say, okay, that's 7. The absolute value of -7 is 7. And the absolute value of 7 is 7. So absolute value is just a way of saying you don't really, you're looking at the magnitude. If you remember your number line, and here's a 0, and say, and we'll keep using this example here. What the absolute value is showing is you really care about this magnitude here. You care about this distance. You don't really care what direction it is. You just want to know how large it is. So that's one of the reasons why you might want to use an absolute value. You don't care if it's a -7 or a +7. You just care how big it is. So, and we have this first equation that we're being asked. We have the absolute value of 2x plus 1 equals 7. So the trick to solving absolute value equations is remembering that what you have to find is this value here has to equal here, and so you have to consider both when 2x plus 1 equals a +7 and when 2x plus 1 equals a -7. Because if 2x plus 1 is a -7 and you've got the absolute value of that, it's still going to be the absolute value of a -7 is still going to be 7. So we have to look at both possibilities. So 2x plus 1 equals 7. If we subtract 1 from both sides, we'll get 2x equals 6. We divide both sides by 2, we get x equals 3. Now 2x plus 1 equals a -7. We subtract 1 from both sides, we'll get 2x equals a -8. So x equals a -4. So those are two possible solutions here. X equals -3, x equals +3, x equals -4. And again, we can just plug that in to make sure. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. Absolute value of 7 is 7. X equals -4. 2 times a -4 is a -8, plus 1 gives us a -7. Absolute value of a -7 is 7. So this next one is a little bit trickier, but it'll be the same idea. We've got 5 times the absolute value of x minus 3 minus 22 equals a -7. All right, so in this case, what we're wanting to find is when this is true for this equation, okay? So this by itself, and there's too much to consider right now, so we've got to simplify it some. So we'll say 5 times x minus 3, and we'll add 22 to both sides, okay, equals 15. All right, 22 plus a minus 22 is 0. 22 plus a minus 7 was 15. Now we can also simplify it even more by saying the absolute value of x minus 3, if we divide both sides by 5, that's equal to 3. Well, now we got enough to where we can work with it just like we did before. We have to consider when x minus 3 equals 3 and when x minus 3 equals a negative 3. Because again, if x minus 3 is equal to a negative 3, you've got the absolute value of that, it's going to be equal to 3. All right, x minus 3 equals negative 3. We add 3 to both sides, we'll get x equals 6. X minus 3 equals a negative 3. We add 3 to both sides, we'll get x equals 0. So now we can plug these back in. All right, 6 minus 3 is 3. The absolute value of 3 is 3. 3 times 5 is 15. 15 minus 22 is a negative 7. And when x equals 0, 0 minus 3 gives us a negative 3. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. 5 times 3 is 15. 15 minus 22 gives us negative 7. So that's how we solve for an absolute value. We have to, when an absolute value, we have to consider when this value inside the vertical lines, the absolute value symbol, we have to consider when that's positive. And we also have to consider when that total will be the opposite of what it's saying it's going to be the solution of. So we have to consider when it's negative also. And then solve for both of those possibilities to get us the answers, our solution set for what x is equal to.